So welcome you two. We already did some background yesterday. We did our research and I showed them, Meg, your website, and Dan, I showed them some of your stories. And so they both got really excited when they learned more about what you both do. And I think I told them like this is going to be pretty relaxed and just a time to kind of talk about writing and reporting. And they all have their first interviews for their first story coming up either today, tomorrow, or these next few days. And so they're really digging in, and we're a lot earlier than we were last year in terms of like our timeline. And so they're already going to be wrapping up their first story by the end of next week. And so that's kind of where they're at in the writing process. They have interviews scheduled, and some of them have already done them, or they are doing them. So that's where we're at. But if you both want to kind of give a little introduction of yourselves, I'll sit back and hang out right in the middle, and we can just enjoy it and have fun.
Great. And Connor, real quick, the students that are in this class this year, are there any that were in the class last year, or is everyone new?
This is actually a mostly new group. I don't think
great.
Here would actually experience it last year. This is all new, but they're all extremely good, and they have picked this up way quicker than I ever imagined. So that's really good.
That's great. Well, I'll start. My name is Meg Vogel, and I'm a staff photographer at the Cincinnati Enquirer. I am from Cincinnati. I went to Mother of Mercy High School, and then I went to Ohio University and studied photojournalism and political science. And through a series of internships at the Enquirer, at a paper in Wisconsin, and then at NPR in Washington, D.C., I kind of found my way back to Cincinnati. And I worked here for 6 years as a photographer, covering everything from the Reds to gorillas to I don't know, it's kind of mind-boggling all the things you get to cover as a journalist. And I've been working on photo stories and creating documentaries and trying to really tell video stories, as well as the Enquirer is really trying to do as much as they can in the digital space with the website, which gives me a lot of space to tell stories in new ways. So that's me. And I get to work a lot with Dan. I'm very lucky. And I'll let Dan tell you a little about himself.
My name's Dan, and I am not from Cincinnati originally. I grew up in Cleveland. And I also went to Ohio University a few years before Meg did. I've been doing this a little longer. When I got out of school there, I had a few internships in Washington and overseas, and then landed here, and have been here for a long time. I've covered courts and government, cops, and crime, politics. Right now I'm doing projects and investigative stuff. I've done and still do narrative stories and feature stories and that kind of thing, some of which I work on with Meg quite a bit. So kind of, Meg and I both have covered all kinds of stuff. So if you guys have specific questions about different kinds of stories, we might have stuff that might be helpful, whether it's investigative and database type of stuff, or whether it's stuff about just feature writing and story ideas. I think we've covered a lot of different stuff that might be able to help you figure some of it out. So I don't know, Connor, if you want to, if you have specific questions or more general questions for us, or if you want to dive into specific questions they have about the work they're doing, I don't know how you want to proceed, but.
For sure. Real quick, they all did prepare some questions, which is awesome. Really quick, it wouldn't hurt. I want you guys to all just go around. I know they can't see you all, but just shout out your name. That's all you got. That's all I'm asking. Just your name. So let's start out.
My name is Monte.
My name is Charlie. That's Quentin back there. He's just off camera a little bit.
Okay. I'm Victoria. I'm Mario.
We got Kaylee back here. Yeah, just slightly hidden. And so there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 of us in this group right now today. But I mean, yeah, we can start off. They do have their own questions, but maybe I can start out with a simple one. If you two, since we're kind of in the middle of the story process right now, it'd really be really cool if you both could just to kind of compare where they're at with how you guys would produce and write a story, whether that's video, whether that's like written. Can you just walk us through the process of, like, you have just been told or you just pitched a story, so you know that happens all the way to it's published on the website. If you want to both walk us through that process so they can kind of get a better image of how it works in the professional world too.
I guess it depends sometimes on the story and how many editors might be involved and how video and photo intense it might be. You know, some stories we just do, and we don't bother photo for every story. I mean, sometimes we can do it with stuff we've already shot or with graphics and that kind of thing. But if it's a bigger story that we know we're going to want to work together on, I'll just give you an example of the story Meg and I were talking about before we got on this call, a story we did a couple months ago in Franklin County, Indiana, about the county that had the lowest COVID vaccination rate in our region. And so the story was, I thought it would be interesting to find the public health official who has to go out and try to sell this vaccine to people who don't want to do it. And what's it like to do that? What's that process like? What are the stakes? You know, how difficult is this going to, you know, what are the infection rates, all that kind of stuff. So I had to do the first step was to get the data, find out, okay, where is the lowest county? You know, how big is that county? What are the logistics of getting there and covering the story, and then finding a person who would be good to follow around and tell this story from a more human standpoint. And so once I did that, I contacted Meg and said, hey, would you be interested in doing this? It seems like the kind of thing that we would do well together. And she was interested. And so then we pitched it to my editor, and she had to pitch it to her editor. And once we get the okay from them, we just launch on the story. And so that kind of story, I'm using it as an example because it involves getting a lot of information that's out there, whether it's public information, data, numbers, facts and figures, that kind of stuff. But also, that's not the story alone that we wanted to write. We wanted to write about the people and why is there resistance in this community? What is it like for the public health person who goes out and tries to convince them of the need to do this? And so you kind of go into it a little blind. Once you find that person, you just set up a time, you go out and you spend a day with them. And that's what we did. And we ended up doing that multiple times, multiple days where we just went out and just spent time with them. And some of those days, that first day we went out, almost none of that ended up in the story. It helped inform the story. It helped us understand the situation better. But that the scenes and stuff that we saw weren't actually the things that ended up getting in the story. But we eventually went out our second or third trip out. And that was the one where we kind of really focused on, you know, this is the time period we're going to tell the story in. So anyway, we go out, we report the story. It takes, you know, on and off several weeks. I gather up my stuff. I have interviews, I have notes, I have data, I have numbers. Meg shoots photos and videos, and she goes back without me at least once. And then I'm on the phone with this other person and without her doing a follow-up interview. So we're each kind of doing in addition to the time we spend together. And then once we get that, we pull it all together and we talk about what fits with the story from video standpoint, what story fits with her videos and photos, putting it together. But she ultimately produces a video. I ultimately produce a story. There's a lot of collaboration in the process, and then we begin the editing process. And so we edited our crew, and in that story, I can't speak for Meg, but I don't think there was a heavy edit. You know, we produced a pretty clean piece when it was done, and it pretty much ran as we produced it. But all told, you know, that process from idea to end probably took a month and a half of, you know, but not of constant work. I mean, we were doing, both of us were doing other things during that time, but there were days where exclusively this. And that's kind of how it works. You're juggling other stuff. You're juggling daily stories and daily demands as they come up, but you're working on this other thing as you go. And at some point you have to make that thing the priority and just do it and finish it. But that's kind of the process. And it makes that too.
And I think there's something so important about this process that, you know, we start a lot with these numbers or this data set, and it's so important that we build that human connection for people, because numbers are interesting, but people are what you're going to connect a reader to. And so by spending so much time with different individuals in this community, we were able to really show what these numbers meant. And I think that's something that it takes a lot of time. And as Dan said, like we spent, I think it was about 14 hours like the first day, and none of that was in the story, but it did help us make connections and help inform that story. And I think that was just really important. And then, you know, Dan and I have worked together a long time, that I think it was our second or third time back when we were like, oh, this is it. And we both knew, and there were like certain moments where we'd look at each other and be like, did you see that? That was it. And I think that's the benefit of having a collaboration with a visual, you know, reporter and a written report. Like we both have, you know, our sets of eyes that are looking in different directions, and we're really able to help each other in telling the story. And then, you know, we drive back from Brookville, Indiana, and it's, you know, about a 50-minute drive, and we would just talk about that story. So another aspect of this is, you know, we come up with the story and the photos and video, and to actually get this published, we have to come up with headlines and then social media language and all the things that actually help your piece get seen. And I work a lot on layout for the print paper and what it looks like online. So those are like things that I never really thought about when I was in school. But it's such a big part of the reporting process and actually getting things published.
And Connor, I just emailed you that story if you guys hadn't found it. So it's if anybody wants to take a look at the end result of that, you can see it. And the way we ended up framing that story was, as you see, is kind of around one night where they set up a pop-up clinic there. And so the time period, it covers about 4 or 5 hours, but you know, the story is based on reporting that took us, you know, weeks of work to get. So it's kind of a trick of, you know, the reader feels like hopefully they're in this moment with these people as they're doing this, but it's informed by all this other reporting that we've done and all this other information we gathered up. So you got a link to it if anybody wants to see it.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I was just thinking in my head, good follow-up assignment right there, actually, for these guys. You talked about it. I'm glad you heard it firsthand from both of them. But Ariel, you're shaking your head over there. But one thing that all of these guys are about to go out and do their interviews. I mean, some like Anna might be leaving in just a few minutes to go interview Miss Tiffany downstairs about a story. When we take students to Camp Joy, which is a camp, I think in like north of here, a little ways, and they can spend the night there. So she's gonna write a story about it, like what it's all about, why it's important, all that stuff. So what advice would you give them all, keeping that in mind, that they're all about to do their first real interview, just to be present? And so what advice do you have in general for doing an interview about these stories you're about to do?
One of my big pieces of advice is to record your interview. I think it helps you be more present while you're talking to someone. I've seen a lot of reporters take notes like really quickly and you miss things. And I think it's important that you make that conversation feel as natural as possible. And just by like putting your phone there and just recording it, you're able to focus and listen, because we often go into an interview with this idea of questions, and it's important to get those things, get the answers you need, but it's also important to see where the person you're interviewing is going to take it, because you might be completely surprised, and by listening and engaging with the individual you're interviewing, your story can be so much richer. And I am able to engage a lot more when I'm just recording. It does take a little bit more time on the back end of going back and listening, but I think you're able to have a lot more accurate quotes, and then you can just trust yourself a little bit more to make sure it's like, okay, they did say this. So I think recording is really important. I do take like little notes when I'm doing video interviews and like mark certain things. But that just helps kind of break down that barrier, because not everyone is a public official that is used to talking to the media, and they can be a little nervous. They can be a little standoffish or answer questions with like, yeah, No, and they're not elaborating as much. So I think trying to break down those barriers is really helpful.
Yeah, I'd suggest too that whether it's a kind of a straightforward story or one that's more complicated, always be as prepared as you can be going in. Know the person you're talking to, do some research on that person, understand where they're from and what they're about, and what they do and why it is you want to talk to them, understand what expertise they have and what you want to get out of them. So just kind of understand who they are, who you're dealing with going into the interview. And then, I always hesitate to say this, but I think you need to kind of write out a list of things, questions, things you want to get answers to. And the reason I say I hesitate is I don't want that to become like this rigid template that you guys use during an interview, because you still want the interview to be a conversation. You want it to be something that feels free flowing, that, it's obviously you're talking to somebody you may have never talked to before, so it's going to feel a little weird, but that's okay. But you still want it to feel a little like a conversation. So you don't want to just read from a script, but you do have stuff you got to know, and you got to have answers to questions. So you got to write down going in, like, what do I need from this interview? What do I have to have? So know that going in, but then also as that conversation unfolds, as Meg said, listen to the conversation. Don't think about the thing you want to ask next. Think about what they're saying to you. And that's one of the advantages. If you write out some questions, you won't lose track of your own stuff. You can listen to them, because a lot of times they'll tell you something you hadn't thought of, or raise a point that you want to expand on. And that does two things. That makes it feel more like a comfortable conversation, but it also gets you information you might not otherwise have had. So be prepared, but also listen, and be prepared to follow that conversation where it takes you. And then I think at some point you also want to ask, are there other people who can help? Other people who have similar expertise as that person, or who might say something different? I mean, I've asked people in interviews, who doesn't agree with you? Who will tell me something different? I mean, who do you argue with about this topic? If I'm not saying you guys are all doing stories like that, but sometimes, you just like, who else has expertise in this? Who else might be good to talk to about this story? And ask follow-up questions, don't feel like you have to stick to that list of questions. Listen to that interview and be prepared to ask follow-up questions.
And I think it's so important to be prepared, like what Dan was saying. And you're going to, as a journalist, you talk to a lot of people that are very, very smart, and way smarter than I will ever be. And I think it's okay to ask questions that make you feel a little silly, or just be like, hey, can you just explain it to me? Like, just break it down, because there are some individuals, and I know we came across this a lot during the pandemic, of like trying to explain what's going on with COVID. And it's like, just break it down for us a little bit, because everyone has like their expertise, and they're real. And when they are an expert in something, they're very passionate about it, and they want people to understand what it is. And don't be afraid to be like, oh, I like to ask questions if you don't understand it, because you are basically the filter of like trying to help other people understand it. And if you don't understand it, that means other people won't. So I love that in this profession, like I've learned a lot about a lot. I always mess it up, but and it's important to do that when you are surrounded by experts and researchers and scientists. And it's okay to ask questions that might come off a little silly. You don't have to be an expert.
Well, and that's a great point, because a lot of reporters feel like they come off sounding dumb if they ask a question that feels obvious, or might be obvious to the person you're talking to. But if you don't know the answer, your readers probably don't either. And you get more information that way. I go into interviews sometimes where I do know the answer to these questions, but I still ask them, because I want to hear what that person has to say about it, because they probably know more than I do about it. Or maybe they're going to try to BS me about it, and I want to find out, if they're going to give me a different line that frankly may not be entirely true. And that would be interesting too. So I do that mostly with politicians and stuff, but it's important to just feel, I mean, I dealt with a ton of lawyers. I covered courts for years, and, some reporters hesitate to ask questions at the end of a court hearing or something about what happened because they feel dumb. It's like, I was like, listen, you go to law school, you did, tell me what the hell this is. I don't understand this. You know, what happens next? What's the procedure? You know, why did you do this? And why did they say this? Just, if you don't know the answer, just ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate that a lot. That's hopefully helpful to hear, like some of that stuff. That kind of affirm some of the things I was saying. Am I crazy?
Crazy that way.
Well, you guys all wrote down. I mean, just like they said, don't feel like you have to follow the map of the questions you asked or wrote down. But if you have something you want to do, Hannah, you've got an interview this week. You want to do? Okay, you can wait and see if she responds then. And then when she gets back to you, you can ask her. Well, it wouldn't hurt to just head down to the office, you know, and just ask, like, hey, I'm looking for this. No, it'll be fine. Or, yeah, or you want to ask your question first? Go for it.
Yeah. My question is, what is your favorite thing or part about being a reporter?
What is our favorite thing about being a reporter? Was that the question?
Yes.
Yes. My favorite thing is that, and this is probably going to steal Dan's answer on this one, but I love that every day is unpredictable and you get to meet a lot of interesting and smart and I'd say whimsical at times. Some people that are just fascinating, and I love that every day you get to meet such a variety. You know, you could start your day I could start my day photographing and interviewing a CEO, and then I can spend my afternoon with a cleanup crew on the Mill Creek. It's just every day is really interesting, and I think, you know, if you string all those days together, it makes a very rich career.
I do agree with Meg on that. You know, oddly, a lot of journalists tend to be introverts. I'm one of them, but it's something about this job does force you to go out and see things and do things, talk to people that you would never have otherwise done. I mean, I never, as a 20-year-old, would have traveled overseas or worked in Washington or talked to a lot of the people I talk to every day now if I didn't do this job. And I think it's made me a different person, and it's given me different perspectives that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And rest assured that the job has its frustrations too. And some days you just don't want to deal with the grunt work that you have to do. But I mean, then there are times where, you know, Meg and I go off and do a story in Indiana, and it's like, it's just kind of fun. You know, you meet these people, you drop into a world that Meg and I would never have spent weeks in Franklin County, Indiana, if it wasn't for this job. And we wouldn't have met the people we met. We wouldn't have understood the issues and the problems the way we understand them now. And hopefully our readers now do, if they read the story. So I think that part of it is rewarding too, because you can do things and bring things to people that they might not otherwise know.
What inspired you to be a reporter?
Was the question what inspired you to be? Dan, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah. You know, I always like stories. I mean, I like reading them. I found at an early age, I liked telling people something they didn't know about, you know, whether it's, you know, about a book I'd read or a person I talked to or something that happened. I mean, I've always seen value in that. And as I got older and had kids and stuff, you see how we're just built to tell and to listen to stories. And so for me, this was kind of a natural thing. If you have some ability to do that and to maybe work to get better at it, I saw value in that. And so for me, it was, you know, this is something I could do that doesn't involve calculus. My sister got the math brain in the family, and you know, you get to tell stories, which is, to me, it feels like a very natural thing to do. And it's hard work, and we don't always do it as well as we want to, maybe, but But to me, that's the daily inspiration, is how do I tell this story? How do I do it justice, and how do I get better at it?
And I totally agree with the storytelling aspect, because I've always been drawn to stories, and I'm a photographer, so I'm like a visual storyteller. And when I was in high school, I went on a service trip, and I was not a very good photographer, but I was really compelled by the power of like taking photos somewhere that I knew my family would never go, and then being able to share that experience with them. And I was able to tell them the stories, and then also show them what it was like. And I saw how impactful that was for them. And then I learned about this little thing called photojournalism. And thankfully it was, 3 hours to the east, at OU, has one of the best programs in the country. And I learned more and more about like what it is and how powerful it is to show images. And that, I remember like one of my first homework assignments was to like go make photographs of someone that you find interesting. And I found everyone interesting at that, and I got to hang out with this farmer at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, this is homework? That's crazy. And I feel very lucky that I get to do that still and actually get paid to do it. It's pretty crazy.
I like that story. I can see. So did you just like get up? Did you meet the farmer before that, Meg, or did you just like find him like?
Usually that's how it is. I'll be driving along and I like stumble across someone, and then I just start into a conversation, and I have my camera on my shoulder, and I've learned that I'm not a very introverted person, but I've learned that I can't be shy, and if I see something, I just pull my car over and go for it. Which my parents don't love, but that's okay. I met this farmer. He was the grandfather of a friend in town. And so I was just talking to people, and I was just so amazed by those connections, as when you start telling them what you're doing, it's like, oh, I know someone interesting. And I think that's the cool thing about working for a local newspaper. I'm from Cincinnati, so I feel like I've worked here for a long time, but all of those stories just kind of build upon each other. And it's just, you never know where it's going to lead you.
All right, y'all. I have some other big questions. Charlie, what's your most favorite story that you wrote?
Favorite story?
Or next case, but
Yeah, well, I have one, but I feel like it was just such a cool experience that I have to say it's my favorite. I was lucky to go to the Congo in West Africa with the Cincinnati Zoo and tell the story of great ape conservation, which means I got to hang out with wild gorillas for 2 weeks. And it was the first story I wrote for the Enquirer. I got to write it, I got to photograph and take videos, and I lived in a tent for a couple weeks in the jungle, which is pretty wild. So it was an amazing story to be able to have the opportunity to tell. It was one of those experiences I'll never forget. And yeah, and it was just, I told a lot of people I was doing it, and they're like, well, you work for the Cincinnati Enquirer, like, why would you be going to the Congo? And I was like, well, every story kind of has these local ties, and that was something so cool to be able to tie it back to what the Cincinnati Zoo has been doing with great apes and gorillas and Harambe. Yeah, lots of webs there. So yeah, that was probably my favorite story so far.
Yeah, I think, I'm a lot older than Meg, so I more things to choose from. But there's some stories are great experiences, and the stories are good, but maybe not your favorite stories, and other stories end up being really great, but the experience was just hard. So it's hard to kind of parse that. But I know just about 5 or 6 years ago, another photographer and I spent a year following around a foster kid who was in her senior year of high school and living on her own, because she'd basically was she bounced from foster home to foster home, and there's a program for 17-year-olds where they can just get an apartment and finish their school on their own. And so we just thought, what would that be like to spend time with that kid while she was trying to navigate her senior year of high school all by herself and figure out, she was a good student. She was trying to figure out how to get into college and juggle financial aid and all the other things that went on. And anyway, it was just a fascinating time. We spent a lot of time with her. We saw her on and off every week, sometimes multiple times in a week for a year. So it was a huge time commitment by everyone. But that's one of those things, you're fully immersed in this person's life. And you just really feel like you get to know them. And when you tell that story, in this case, I think the story and the photos turned out well. You feel like you're representing who that person is to the wider world. And that was a great experience. It was a great, I think it's shown a light on something that people didn't know about, that kids are out there doing this. But I think we also represented her well. I think people felt like when they read that story, they understood who she was. So that's one that stands out for me. And there's other in the past, like makes a great experiences. You know, I interned overseas. I spent some time in 4 months in Israel, and I spent a week with a Palestinian family in the occupied West Bank. I was 21 years old. You know, it's like I don't know I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but it ended up being a fascinating experience. It was hard and frightening, but it was a fascinating experience. And those are the kind of things you get to do sometimes in this job. You know, you remember 30 years later when somebody asks you what stories stand out in your mind. I mean, that was a great experience for me to be able to do something like that. I'd never have met those people or done anything like that if not for this job.
That's really good questions. We'll follow up questions so you can think of more. Go back questions. Meg has a really cool philosophy on photography and what makes a good photo. So I think someone had that question.
If you guys have specific questions about stuff you're working on or interviews you're doing too, that's fine. Hey, don't be afraid to ask if you have a specific question about how do I find some piece of information or how do I talk to this person that I got to talk to tomorrow. Just go ahead and ask.
I keep leaning in. I have headphones on. It doesn't make a difference. It's like, what?
Huh? Oh yeah, absolutely. What do you have now? Now let me grab it. What is that? What is the problem? Someone had a question about the topic, Daniel. Well, whoever wrote it, maybe that was Ariel. She might have left. But Meg, do you want to talk about your philosophy of kind of what makes, when they're out running photography, what makes a really good photo in your eyes? Or what is something that they can look for or to have in mind when they're taking pictures?
Great question. Well, I think it's really important when you're thinking about visuals is to think about what the story is. There are a lot of great photographs, but there might not be the most storytelling. And I think when you're working on a story, it's like a lot of people will only look at a photograph and a headline. So you have to be really mindful of what that pairing is. Sometimes I see like really sad stories and I see a picture of people just like smiling like really big, and I was like, oh, that kind of feels a little off there. So when I'm making photographs, and I always say I'm making a photograph and I'm not taking a photograph, because there's so much that goes into a photograph. You're looking at composition, you're looking at light, you're looking at exposure and like all the technical stuff on your camera, but you're also looking at the moment. And to make a photograph, it takes time. And I think to be really in tune with what the story is, and I like to be present for the interviews and as much part of the story, because I don't want to just go to someone's house and make a portrait and then be done, because there's always a little bit more. Portraits are a really, I would say, a quicker way of telling, of illustrating a story. I think, making sure that someone is in good light, making sure, I like portraits where the person might not necessarily looking directly in the camera. They could be looking off. They could be caught in a moment. Being mindful of when you are photographing someone in a portrait is, what is surrounding them? What is help telling the story of who they are? I like documentary photography where you are following someone and trying to be a little bit of, blend in, and they kind of forget you're there. So you get to actually document and like show what the person looks like in their environment, what they, how they're feeling. And because people can, I think you're all aware of this, people can be very camera aware, and they are very understanding of when you have a camera up. And I mean, a phone is really different than having a big camera and a lens, and I've got two of them. So I try to spend a lot of time to make sure that people do feel comfortable. But I think the biggest thing is, while you guys are learning, is just paying attention to the tone and paying attention to, does the story match the photo? And that's a little bit harder thing to do. If you've got a story that's really happy and celebratory, look for that same emotion in the image. And I'm assuming a lot of your stories, it might be people doing things. Have photos of them actually doing some of those things. I think candid moments are something that people connect with really, really quickly. And if you are telling a story, practice your portraits. Do a portrait and a candid moment, and then you have an option. So,
and just Meg, I just sent him a link to the baseball story we did a couple of years ago, because I think that's a good example of what Meg's talking about. Is this was a baseball team working on another project, and we found this little team in Elmwood Place that hadn't won a high school baseball game in 3 years, I think. And anyway, our first thought was we wish we'd found them sooner, because we would have followed them for the whole season and done that story. But it's a good example of what Meg's talking about, of how photos can tell stories, and how candid photos are so important when you're trying to tell those stories about what's happening. And there's a gallery, story, there's a gallery of photos at the top of it that kind of shows Meg's work and how it fits with the story. I mean, a lot of, we ended up writing a very tight story that I think really worked from a photo and story standpoint about this team struggle to just win a damn game. And it was an interesting time. We spent a good bit of time there. It didn't turn out to be like a huge story, but it's a good example of what Meg's talking about. So I just sent you that link, Connor.
And I will just say, because whenever Dan and I talk about the story, I have to acknowledge it. When you are taking pictures of people when they're not happy, it's really hard. And I don't know why. It's just like when I hear that shutter click, it just sounds 10 times louder. And I'm just like, it hurts my heart. And there was a moment where one of the first baseman, Pot, got thrown out of the game, and the coach was yelling at him. And I was like, oh gosh, I can't take this picture. Like, this poor kid he's just getting yelled at, other words. And Dan just like kind of looked at me, and I was like, you're right. I know I have to, like, that is the story. But it's hard. But the other pictures were a little bit happier.
Well, you guys, it looks like we have about 1 minute left. I know Nia got excited to ask a question.
Yeah, I've got 2 hands up back there.
Really quick, ask a question and really quick answer. I'll wrap it up after that. You go for it.
Doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter what angle you take pictures from all the time.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry. I heard what I'm hearing, like every other word.
Well, you're good. It's because of Peter. She had a question of
When being a photographer, doesn't matter what angle you take pictures from all the time.
Oh, that's a great question. And I can answer that quickly. I think as a photographer, it's important to take pictures from different angles to add variety. It's important to take pictures really like up close. We call those details, and it's really important to take pictures from really far away. I'm a really tall person, so I like. I'll take pictures from like really high angles, but then because I'm so tall, I like to see what the perspective is from the ground. So I lay on the ground a lot. I think it's important to mix up your angles because the more variety there is, the more interesting it is to your reader and viewer.
Oh man, we got the barrage ambush outside right now trying to break down the door. We can go around the applause, please.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Meg and Dan, I know that was brief, but I can't thank you. Seriously, especially the interview tips, I think that really is going to make an impact as they go. Because Hannah literally went to go do her interview, and I think was feeling more empowered thanks to your advice. So I appreciate that a lot. And hopefully, again, we can eventually do something like this in person.
Yeah.
Or do like we did last year, where we did the. I mean, when it's safe to, of course, even if it's next semester, next year, whatever it looks like. But like how we did the critiques before, I think that would be a really cool kind of next step. Eventually, when they're doing a story, they can like present you what they have, and then you guys can kind of critique like last year.
I think that was really helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was for sure.
Yeah.
But yes, but you two, again, I'll never thank you enough for all your involvement with us. Go Bobcats as always. I got to graduate. A weekend for I didn't have a graduation.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And so that was a blast to go back to Athens and everything briefly. But I got to kind of fully close that chapter of OU, even though I've been working for a full year anyway. But
you got to graduate on the green too, which is so cool.
On the green, it was beautiful. Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah, very thankful for that. My family too, getting all the pictures. That was really sweet. And so.
Well, congratulations. That's great.
Yes, congratulations. And yeah, thank you for inviting us to do this. I thought it was really nice to have this time with them, and they had good questions. And so, yeah, I look forward to doing it the next time.